Why every baker needs parchment paper. Can you reuse parchment paper? Can you reuse parchment paper is a kitchen essential that has a variety of uses. In this article, we will discover the elements that deem the reusability of parchment paper, the dangers and advantages of reusing it, and the choices you can deem. Introduction to Can you reuse parchment paper and its benefits. Advantages of using Can you reuse parchment paper. Factors that determine the reusability of Can you reuse parchment paper. Type and quality of Can you reuse parchment paper. Nature and intensity of Can you reuse parchment paper. Can you reuse parchment paper? Yes or no? Arguments for Can you reusing parchment paper. Arguments against Can you reusing parchment paper. Best practices for Can you reusing parchment paper. Inspection and cleaning procedures of Can you reuse parchment paper. Storage techniques for Can you reuse parchment paper. Risks associated with Can you reuse parchment paper. Contamination and health risks of Can you reuse parchment paper. Reduced baking and roasting efficiency of Can you reuse parchment paper. Alternatives to reusing parchment paper of Can you reuse parchment paper. Baking mats of Can you reuse parchment paper. Aluminum foils of Can you reuse parchment paper. Final verdict on reusing parchment paper of Can you reuse parchment paper. People frequently asked questions, FAQ, of Can you reuse parchment paper? Can I use aluminum foil rather of parchment paper? Conclusion of Can you reuse parchment paper? Similar items article. If you decide to reuse parchment paper, there are certain best practices to follow to ensure its effectiveness and safety. Lining a baking sheet with parchment paper is an easy process. While the usage of parchment paper on a baking sheet is a notable way to enhance your baking, there are some frequent mistakes that you must avoid. After the use of a baking sheet lined with parchment paper, it is vital to smooth it suitable to make certain that it lasts a lengthy time. Once the baking sheet and parchment paper are definitely dry, you can shop them in a cool, dry